It's 1 o'clock on the East, 10 out west. Here's what's happening. New protests and some questions about the separations at the border. The government says it knows where all the children are, while critics question the motivation behind zero tolerance.
It's wrong to separate babies, to use cruel, inhumane policies in order to gin up your political base. And it seems like it's working.
The president defending his immigration policy in front of the faithful. Why the criticism he's received may be galvanizing his supporters in the end. Also, who deserves due process in the United States? The president tweeting this morning about U.S. immigration laws that may put that into question. We'll ask the First Lady's immigration attorney about that. We're going to start with a live picture, though, of Capitol Hill. New reaction from the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Mike McCaul. The Republican congressman suggests the Trump administration's zero-tolerance border policy may soon be coming to an end. Here's what Congressman McCaul said earlier.
I have heard recent reports now that policy may be revisited and it may not go forward.
Zero tolerance?
That's some of the reporting I'm getting, and it's very unclear how this executive order is playing out. But I'm unclear about now the prosecution of the parents. I think they want to reunite the family and then remove them from the country.
Meanwhile, Democrats, including one lawmaker who visited a detention center this weekend, is firing back at President Trump for his handling of the border crisis, and as well as the rhetoric that's being used.
Went into the processing center where there are cages. Certainly, if people think there aren't, there are. We saw these cages. And then we went to the detention center where we talked to maybe 10 or 15 mothers. These are jails. These are prisons. These are people who are being criminalized.
The president uses words like they're breeders in sanctuary cities who are protecting breeders. He said yesterday, they come to infest. And he doesn't use it as immigration policy. He doesn't use it as border control policy. He uses it as an issue in order to energize his political base for the midterm elections.
And the president continues to say, if we could get Democratic help, America, please understand, there's not one single Democrat in any of these meetings.
The president today following up on comments he made at a Nevada GOP yesterday event that was happening there by suggesting in a tweet earlier that migrants coming through the southern border should be immediately deported without due process. We have much to go over today with NBC's Cal Perry and Gabe Gutierrez in Texas, NBC White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, and two of the hour's panel members, the Wall Street Journal's Vivian Salama and Aaron McPike from Swan Street Strategies. We're going to start, though, at the White House. Kelly O'Donnell with the very latest for us. And Kelly, let's start with the president's tweets there about due process, saying no judges or court cases. What's he saying?
Well, he is using some tough language today, which is no surprise. That's in keeping with the president's tone and tenor. We saw it on the campaign trail, and it's certainly evident in his Twitter feed. He talks about we cannot allow all of these people to invade our country. That's a very strong term. When someone comes in, we must immediately, and then here parenthetically, with no judges or court cases, bring them back. It should be send them back from where they came. The president here is referring to requests for a flood of additional legal help to address these issues so that if someone is detained at the border and charged with a misdemeanor, that there would be a legal process to work them through the system and then ultimately whatever outcome takes place there. Part of that has been the cause of the family separations. If a parent is charged with a misdemeanor, there had been a requirement to separate the children and not detain them together. So the president is clearly separating U.S. citizens from non-U.S. citizens. Implied in his comments is that a non-U.S. citizen would not have the same due process rights. The president may be on an island considering that information because the process is certainly extended. If you're in the country, they are in the country, even if brought here unlawfully. The process is intended to, and it is a difficult one because of the numbers of people we're talking about and relative shortages of resources in terms of judges and bed space and so forth. But these are harsh words from the president that are in line with what he is saying on the campaign trail, rallying for other candidates and for his own reelection. And it does have the impact of firing up his own political base, something he thinks is is essential to attempt to hold the House, control of the Congress, the Republicans who have it now and may lose it, and to, as he says, hold the Senate or perhaps increase, based on individual races, the number of Republicans in the Senate. He is calling for a red wave to counter the Democrats' language of a blue wave that they see coming in November. Of course, primaries are underway now. The president will be campaigning this week, and it's just a few months before Election Day at this midterm point, which is a big reflection on the president's overall time in office. Immigration is in many ways what put him on the map, and it's something that is used by the president to sustain his political base. Richard?
NBC's Kelly O'Donnell, thank you for that great wrap-up. I appreciate it, Kelly. Join me now, Michael Wilds, immigration attorney and former federal prosecutor. Thanks for joining us. You're also the First Lady's former lawyer, right? Is that correct? And
I happen to still represent the First Lady's parents and sister.
Got it.
But I'm here today in my own
in your own capacity, clearly. Let's talk about specifically what the president said today. And I'll read it again from the language that Kelly reported on. We cannot allow all of these people to invade our country. When somebody comes in, we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came. Is this saying no to due process?
Let's pull the lens back, Richard, on the landscape here. Our founding documents and the Constitution protect all persons, no matter how old they are, no matter what their color, ethnicity, or party affiliation, with due process. The Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Legally, as an immigration lawyer, I should tell you, you don't affect a legal entry until you've been admitted. But once you're on U.S. soil, due process attaches, and you're entitled to a credible fear interview. They're here, Richard, for our country's mercy. For us to even insinuate, to use words like infestation is horrendous. To us to even insinuate that we're going to remove due process. Where are we as the moral compass of the world? Yes, we want to shore up a very strong border. But to even insinuate that we're not going to afford these poor families a moment in court is really unconscionable.
The word, if you look at it, so you're saying that they are afforded, again, due process. There have been arguments from the right that says no, because they're not U.S. citizens, they're not afforded the protections and the rights underneath the U.S. Constitution. That is the counter argument.
Absolutely, and the truth is, this is a political ping pong in order to rile up the base so that people will come up, as the last speaker said, in November. Once you are on U.S. soil, you may not have made a legal entry by the terms of art that immigration law has called. I'm a professor of law at Cardozo Law School in New York. But you are entitled to due process, and that is a credible fear hearing and to the kinds of protections that you would imagine. And again, let's keep this simple on this beautiful Sunday. These people are here for mercy, for us to even insinuate that we're not going to give them the basic humanity, which is a day in court and water and food, is inhumane.
I want to go to what has been part of that which those who are saying, yes, they are afforded, again, all these rights and privileges, the 14th Amendment. And in the 14th Amendment, when you look at the specific wording in there, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process. The focus has been on the word person on the left-hand side, if we can bring that back up. And they're saying, well, they are people, and therefore, as you were saying, if you come into the land of the free, the United States, you are therefore a person and afforded these rights.
Imagine had our founding fathers scripted this differently. This is, again, America's golden doors being opened, and we have to make sure at all times, Richard, that they're hinged open. The president is executing on laws on the books, broken laws that have been on the books for years. It's really up to Congress now to legislate, to make sure emphatically where the line on the sand is, and this has gone beyond being partisan, not Democrat, not Republican. It is inhumane the way these children are being treated.
So the president says, and we'll go back to his statement, when somebody comes in, which therefore intimates into the United States, which then brings into the discussion that you have brought up, once you cross over the border, you are afforded these rights and privileges. Can the president, based on what he's said so far today, do anything to abridge that, to not allow judges or court cases for these particular cases?
I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to give a little anecdote. I, as an immigration lawyer, when I go to the American Embassy in London, I cannot accompany a client into the embassy because they have established that the attorney-client privileges and all of that does not work inside the American Embassy. The rules are very different on U.S. soil. And that's why we had the whole drama years ago with Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and so forth. The bottom line is any individual, once their feet are on the ground, we have to accord them due process. To intimate otherwise, again, is a beacon call to Congress to step up and not allow the president to continue to do this.
One of the cases that one of the elements with this is also those who come to the border and ask for asylum, right? And the numbers of those who are non-U.S. citizens that do approach or cross the border number in about less than 10% of those who are non-U.S. citizens that come into the United States. What is the process? Are they being allowed to go through the asylum process? What are you seeing with the cases that you've had so far?
I should say anecdotally that I do have a book called Safe Haven in America coming out where I discuss some of the more profiled matters of defection and espionage and asylum. Asylum law is very simple, Richard. A person has the right to a day in court, a credible fear interview. There is a dichotomy between young children that are coming in and how long they can be held. And if the president is going to take the approach that every person in the zero tolerance is now going to be treated like a criminal, then the asylum application runs concurrently with criminal charges. Now, they're slapping people on the hands on the criminality, but the asylum is the beacon call here, and there it gets a little complicated, because people who are coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, they're coming through Mexico. And the question is, do they have a right to asylum in the United States? Is it an economic magnet, or is it a political fear that they have in their nation? And there the president is splitting hairs. They're running away from gangs. That's being sanctioned by the countries. The countries are not taking care of the gangs. These poor people are watching their relatives being felled and shot on their backyards. I have clients that are telling me, Richard, that their children are eating and they're more comfortable in these cages than they are in their homes, but it's still unconscionable that we would not give the biblical sense of hospitality that our nation is known for and even insinuate that we're going to stop due process. That is just unconscionable.
Michael Wildes, thank you so much again. These statements just coming from the president and trying to understand where this fits in, not only from his stance, his platform, but how it fits in clearly underneath the laws of the land. And I appreciate your clear view on that. Michael Wildes.
He's trying to make us safe, but this is not the way to do it, Richard.
Michael Wildes, immigration attorney, former federal prosecutor. Thank you, sir.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Meanwhile, of course, all of this is the focus on these protests today, or related to it, that are taking place across the country. And this is against the zero tolerance policy that Michael Wildes was just discussing with us, and the statements coming from the president on the zero tolerance policy. This is one of those protests earlier today in Tornillo, Texas. NBC's Cal Perry was there. And Cal, tell us what you're seeing right now. You heard the discussion about what the president has said, saying no judges, no court cases here. That would obviously affect a lot of those individuals that you've been reporting on at the detention centers around you.
Yeah, and let's be clear, 60% of the federal court proceedings are usually jammed up by immigration proceedings, right? And just to describe to people what actually happens down here along the border is groups of people are brought into these courthouses. They're asked how do they plead in unison, and then they have to answer in unison, and they usually sort of say, everybody says C, and then they go back to a facility. Usually the judge will then ask them, please don't come back and do this again because then I'll have to send you to prison. So down here, that's sort of a daily way of life. I think people would be surprised to hear that around the rest of the country. Now, as for the protests that took place behind me, we saw about 1,000 people here, I would say, a mix of politicians as well as some celebrities and people from the area who came in to really just protest the lack of access that's going on here, as well, of course, as the kids who are being held inside. Somewhere between 250 to 270 unaccompanied minors in this camp behind me. We understand that 7 of them are girls. They were brought here about 36 hours ago. But to the point that everybody is sort of making, there just does not seem like a real plan to unify these kids. We heard that from Senator Udall just yesterday, who asked one of the officials in the camp, he said, what's the plan to unify these kids with their families? And the senior senator, Richard, of New Mexico, was told, you'll have to call back in a week and find out that information.
Yeah, I remember, and you were interviewing him yesterday, and that when that happened, of course, we're talking about a U.S. senator saying to call back in a week. Update us quickly here, Cal, because you also have some new numbers that came in overnight from the Department of Homeland Security on some of the unaccompanied alien children and where they're at today. Some new numbers.
The members who have gone in today?
Yeah, 522, is that right, have been reunited?
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. So 522 have been reunited. But listen, here's the thing that we have to remember, right? These numbers sometimes don't just not add up. Also, we don't really know what we're being told. There's a lot of confusion as to when people were detained, how they were detained, and the method of when and how it happened, right? So the new old policy that President Trump put into place sort of just kicked in recently. And then that EO left a lot of people in the lurch, left a lot of people in a loophole, including the kids behind me. But we are hearing from DHS today, as you said, around 500 people have been reunited. Kids have been reunited with their families already. Keep in mind, 11,000 minors have been detained in the last few months. 2,000 of them were separated from their families. That still leaves about 9,000 that came on their own. Something we're still trying to work on, Richard.
All right, NBC's Cal Perry there for us at the border in Tornillo, Texas. Thank you, sir. President Trump blaming the Democrats for the migrant crisis that we've been covering, but how can they help to solve the problem if he cannot? We'll talk to a leading Democrat on that.
They want to use the issue, and I like the issue for election, too. Our issue is strong borders, no crime. Their issue is open borders. Let MS-13 all over our country. That's what's going to happen if you listen to them.
President Trump escalating his attacks against Democrats at a Nevada GOP event in Las Vegas yesterday, and then today going so far as to suggest migrants coming through the southern border should be deported without due process. Joining me now, Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California. Representative, thank you for being with us, and you probably saw that tweet that came out just within the last 2 hours. And in that tweet, just to go back to the wording itself, it says that those who come in, and I'll read straight from it, when somebody comes in, we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came. Representative, from your perspective as a lawyer, is this a suggestion of a lack of due process?
Absolutely. When I served on active duty in the Air Force, I actually worked on this issue of what rights do people have once they come on U.S. soil. And the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment attaches to all persons, not just U.S. citizens. So what Donald Trump tweeted today is just flat out unconstitutional. It's another example of him trying to violate the laws and not adhere to the rule of law in the United States.
When you do look at that, since you did look at that as a JAG and the very topic itself, what was the counter argument? That which we have seen so far is to say that if you're not a U.S. citizen, you should not be afforded, again, the right to go to court, the right here in this case of due process.
The issue comes to whether you are on U.S. soil or not. That's why the administration has Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. That's why they want to keep that facility, because that's not U.S. soil. But for anyone who comes onto U.S. soil, the U.S. Constitution's 14th Amendment applies. They have the absolute right to due process. And for the president to tweet that out today shows that he actually has not read the Constitution.
I also want to address something that's been part of this, and those are asylum seekers. Some of the numbers so far are showing that in the thousands, some 6,000 individuals coming to the border within the first quarter of the year. The number of those that have crossed the border, though illegally, much greater, about 10 times greater than that. Do you believe that those coming to the border seeking asylum are getting the right treatment as they try to gain asylum here in the United States?
Not at all. The latest data shows that about 76% of people who are showing up on U.S. soil have a credible fear of persecution. That means they can file a legal asylum claim. What Jeff Sessions did is he completely upended what was happening, and he's now prosecuting every single person who's coming into the United States, even though they may have a legal asylum claim. That's what's causing all this chaos and confusion. They should go back to the process before, where we let the people file the legal asylum claim, figure out if they can claim asylum, and if they can't, then send them and their kids back as a unit instead of separating them right now.
We're hearing from the Department of Homeland Security overnight. You probably saw the same memo, sir, and that is that the Customs and Border Protection Agency saying that they have reunited 522 children so far, 2,053, again, the latest numbers overnight, still being held by HHS. Are we seeing the right speed of progress from where you sit?
Not at all. Right now, there's still thousands of babies and kids who were ripped away from their parents by the Trump administration that have not been reunited with their parents. And what's more troubling is we've been asking very basic questions, such as, how do you make sure that the baby is the right one for the parents? How did you even keep track of that? And the Trump administration has not been able to answer those very basic questions. Other basic questions, such as, how do you know if any of these kids have food allergies? What if they have certain medical ailments that need treatment? They can't answer those questions as well.
As you know, some of the eyes that have been able to get into some of those detention centers are fellow lawmakers like yourself. You're from Southern California, of course, a border state with Mexico. There are detention centers in Southern California, and there are some unaccompanied children there in Southern California right now. What are you hearing? What have you been able to learn based on your connections there in Southern California?
So we know that the Trump administration is trying to reunite some of these babies and kids, but there's this other issue that people may not have thought about, which is you have all these adults being sent to all these prison facilities across America, and they can't handle them. So there is a prison facility in Victorville where their prison guards have come forward and said, we can't deal with all these people that was just dropped off at our facility. And in addition, I do want to commend the ACLU, who gave all these migrants the rights to seek an attorney, because again, they're on U.S. soil. They have the right to due process.
What would you like to do with fellow Democrats and Republicans to fix the problem that causes crises like this day to day?
So Democrats are very willing to work with the president and Republicans to solve the issue of border security, providing a legal pathway for dreamers and undocumented youth, and to deal with family separation. The problem is the president wants to add to that changes to lawful and legal immigration. That is what is holding all of this up. If we just address the issues around DACA, family separation, and border security, we can solve that. We should not make changes to lawful and legal immigration, which is what the White House wants to do.
All right, Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California, thank you, sir, for stopping by on the Sunday.
Thank you, Richard.
All righty. Coming up, how is the migrant crisis changing President Trump's support from his base? Americans think more highly of Mr. Trump as a president than as a person. That's according to a Gallup poll taken last week. The president had a 45% approval rating, but only 36% of those polled view him positively as a person. And along party lines, 75% of Republicans have a positive impression of him. Compare that to Democrats, only 7% of them think of the president positively. This has been some of the scenes that we've seen so far today on this Sunday. More protests across the country, many of which have been at detention facilities close to the border. We've been in McAllen, Texas, Tornillo, Texas. We've been in Homestead, Florida over this weekend, and this has been the scenes. And then today, the president obviously watching what is happening as these protests continue, tweeting a couple of hours ago, we cannot allow all these people to invade our country. When somebody comes in, we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came. And that has brought the headlines. For instance, Philip Rucker and David Weigel saying Trump advocates depriving undocumented immigrants of due process rights. And that is one of the breaking news headlines in the Washington Post. So that is the question. With this statement from the president just today, in response to what we have seen in that video, detention centers and those in support of reuniting families and the issue of immigration, what does the president mean today? Is it a new wrinkle? Let's bring in Vivian Salama, White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Vivian, I know that you were with the president yesterday in Nevada. You heard that, which he said. But let's start with what he said today, and then we'll go to what you saw at that particular rally in Nevada. What do you make of his statement, again, about saying no judges or court cases?
Well, the president is obviously at battle with the judiciary. He has been from the very beginning on a number of issues, but especially with regard to immigration. He feels that the justice system has essentially thwarted his efforts to try to crack down on immigration and fund measures that would toughen our security at the border. And so this is obviously something that is very much on his mind since the beginning of his presidency, and even with regard to the travel ban that we saw last year and other measures, he believes that the court system basically is an impediment to him getting this through. And so that obviously very much playing out now in this current crisis where the president believes that his efforts are being thwarted once again by the judicial system.
All right, I'd like to bring in Aaron McPike, partner at Swan Street Strategies, also joining us today. Aaron, I know that you're in the field today. What have you seen so far on this very topic? And Vivian and I were just talking about the president's recent statements this morning via his Twitter account. What's your thought?
Well, look, what I think we heard from the president yesterday at his rally in Nevada is that he wants to campaign on this, which seems to me just crazy. It's clear that the American people are very against the Trump administration and what they've done. And so now you're seeing groups come out to rally because they are trying to get out the vote and say, we need to have Democrats take over the House if you actually want to get anything done. Because certainly President Trump wants to push some tougher immigration measures, and that's just not going to work. They have to have a really different kind of policy come through. So it's moving now toward a midterm get out the vote message. That's what I heard this morning.
Vivian, do you agree with what Aaron is saying there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously very much a central message for him in general. But of course, now that we're getting closer to the midterm elections, he sees it as a major factor to essentially get his party to maintain its majority in the House and in the Senate come November. And we heard that last night from him, where he said, I believe that I got elected because I'm tough on immigration, I'm tough on border security. And so this is something that's becoming almost personal to him, where he says, if anyone gets in my way and tries to hurt our chances of maintaining our majority in Congress, then obviously he's going to fight back hard. And that's what we see him doing. He's ramping up those efforts. So, yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Aaron, which base gets...
If I can add, one of the things... Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, one of the places that I see this story going at some point is where the Trump administration is lacking in other areas. And that is that the Trump administration has not actually appointed an ambassador to Honduras, to El Salvador. There is a new ambassador in Guatemala. But the point is that the Trump administration and the State Department is not doing much in Central America to actually stem the tide of this particular problem. And that's something that we saw in 2014, too, when we had the big migrant crisis then over the border then. We were focused on this as a DHS issue, but there really is a State Department issue.
Right.
And we need to see more coverage of that. And we need to see the Trump administration say what they're going to do from a diplomatic perspective, and then what Democrats would like to see happen in that way as well. I think that could actually be a big issue and an animating issue going into the next presidential election. But we need a strong State Department to actually fix the root of this crisis.
But Aaron, is that cart before the horse?
Is it? I don't know. We have sent foreign aid before, but I think it is. Why would it be cart before the horse when people are making this tough journey? We saw Jeh Johnson, who was the Secretary of Homeland Security, actually go to Guatemala and say, don't make this journey. But what we need to do is actually help the people in Central America deal with the crisis that they're dealing with right there.
Right. And what you're really doing so well here, Aaron, is you're showing the complexity of this crisis that we're seeing today. Vivian, that crisis, that complexity, the question is, can the different agencies that would help to solve crises like this work together? There are upwards of almost 10 different agencies related to this very topic of immigration, and whether these agencies are ready and honed and skilled based on the talent that had been assigned to and appointed to it to get it done.
Yeah, this has been a major issue for this administration throughout. I actually just did a story in the Wall Street Journal on Friday where we looked at the complicated interagency process and how this administration has struggled throughout its time in office. We saw it with the rollout of the travel ban, where it was completely chaotic. Most agencies did not know exactly what they were supposed to do because of the fact that it was a hastily rolled out executive order. We saw the exact same thing happen this time around, where you have multiple agencies, especially Health and Human Services, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, all of them who had a very important mandate to execute this very complicated order. And yet no one really knew what was happening on Thursday, the day after the executive order was rolled out, and orders were being delayed from reaching the point officers at the border. And so you really didn't have a halt in the separation of families immediately that you would expect from such a publicly signed order. And And so the interagency process, very important in general under any administration, but unfortunately because there is a level of inexperience with this administration, but also just the president, the way that he sort of governs very hastily, decides to roll things out without a lot of notice and governing from the top down, that has led to a lot of confusion. And we definitely saw it playing out this week with regard to the executive order to keep the families together.
Aaron, as you have covered so many elections before, this topic of immigration, does it energize more of the base on the left or energize more of the base on the right?
So, Richard, I think that is an excellent question, and I think we saw part of the answer to that, at least from the past, from President Trump yesterday. I do think that it has been a very animating issue for Republicans, especially those base Republicans who Republican candidates can count on to come out in midterm elections, and that's why the president is pushing this issue, because Republicans are more reliable voters in the midterm elections. I'm from Ohio, and there is a 3% Hispanic population in Ohio, but yet it is a very important issue to Republican voters in Ohio. Many of them, I would say, and I'm making a generalization here, don't actually understand the intricacies of immigration, but yet get really mad about it. And you're seeing some Republicans, like President Trump, make immigration sound like a bad word. Well, you know, when I covered Mitt Romney in 2012, he used to say things like, I love legal immigration, and we need to fix the legal immigration system. But President Trump is scaring voters about immigration on the whole. So he does know that it does galvanize the Republican base. We are seeing now that there could be a shift, and I do think that the left is starting to galvanize more on this issue. So I think that the answer to your question is that remains to be seen for this cycle, but in the past, it has certainly galvanized Republican voters more on the right.
A great discussion. Aaron McPike there at the border. Vivian Salama just back from covering the president there in Nevada during a rally there. Thank you both. Good to have you. Coming up, the language of the president. What are the words that he's using? How it's heightening the crisis at the border potentially.
It's a brand given to cover the whole story.
We have news just breaking tonight.
Is to dig deeper than anyone else.
And welcome back. Let's get straight back to the border, watching, of course, those locations where we have seen detention centers, potentially reunification happening. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is at the Port Isabel Detention Center in Los Fresnos, Texas. Gabe, you know the numbers that you know so well, 522 children, according to the Customs and Border Protection Agency, have been reunited. What are you seeing there at that location?
Hi there, Richard. Well, yes, as you mentioned, Customs and Border Protection says it's reunited more than 500. Still, when it comes to HHS, more than 2,000 children still separated. This is a large detention center here run by DHS, the Port Isabel Detention Center. It's near Brownsville, Texas, in Las Cruces, Texas. It's really out of the way, but this is where, over the last several days, immigration attorneys daily have been coming in to visit here with some of those parents that have been detained. We have spoken with several mothers who told us that they had virtually no idea how to communicate with their children, and that it's only within the last couple of days that they have been, ICE officers have been coming to gain information from some of these immigration attorneys and from some of the detainees to help match up this process. Now, we're told by an ICE official that this is part of the process where an ICE agent can communicate with some of the attorneys to try and learn more information about some of these detainees in order to expedite that process. But for the detainees here, and of course we have no access to them, we're not allowed inside this facility, but we were able to speak with them by phone, as they are allowed to use phone cards to speak with the outside world through a phone in their pod. They sleep 50 to a pod, we're told by these immigration attorneys. But it really goes to show you how difficult it has been for these detainees as they await their criminal proceedings to go through to be able to find out where their child is. And 4 of the women we spoke with, 2 of them had no idea where their child was. One of them told us that she had learned only through family members that that child was in New York State. Another one told us she found out through family members that that child was in Michigan. We are speaking with another one that, a grandmother in Honduras waiting to hear from word for her granddaughter who is at a detention facility, we're told, in Arizona, while her mother is in Texas. So, Richard, as we've been reporting and as as we've been hearing throughout the last couple of days, this is very a logistical nightmare in order for these children to be reunited with their parents here at one of the largest detention centers here in this area, here in Port Isabel. That process is happening right now.
Okay.
Richard.
Thank you so much, Gabe. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez for us. I appreciate it. And coming up, the dangerous and ugly rhetoric surrounding the separation of migrant families. Next hour as well, the man who is spending tens of millions of dollars to put President Trump out of work. Firestorm around racially offensive rhetoric from President Trump's former deputy campaign manager. David Bossie had this exchange with Democratic strategist Joel Payne. Take a listen.
You don't have to be a golden retriever to hear all the dog whistles coming out of the White House these days. And for my friend David over here.
Final point. Michael Hayden. All right, you said that about David. David, Michael Hayden posted a picture of Auschwitz. Donnie Deutsch is talking.
That liberal Michael Hayden. Yeah, that screaming liberal Michael Hayden.
You're out of your cotton-picking mind.
Cotton-picking mind? Brother, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. I got some relatives who pick cotton, okay? And I'm not going to allow you to attack me like that on TV. I'm not out of my cotton-picking mind.
You're out of your mind.
Well, you saw Fox News host there, Ed Henry, in the middle. He said after that exchange that he and Fox News, quote, don't agree with that particular phrase and that it was obviously offensive. Now, this comes amid some new tweets from President Trump on immigration, one of which recently he says in part, we cannot allow all of these people to invade our country. And today, Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez weighed in on the president's use of rhetoric like that.
The president uses words like they're breeders in sanctuary cities. We're protecting breeders. He said yesterday, they come to infest. I mean, these are the kinds of words that the Republican Party and this president uses. And he doesn't use it as immigration policy. He doesn't use it as border control policy. He uses it as an issue in order to energize his political base for the midterm elections.
All right, let's bring in Republican strategist Lauren Zelt, managing director of FP1 Strategies. We also have Democratic strategist Don Calloway, CEO of Pine Street Strategies. All right, you sigh there, and I get a sense you were listening to what was said there on Fox. Don, tell us why, and there's been a lot of talk after that interview that you've probably seen, that the use of that term, that racially offensive term, cotton picking, that was used for that African-American guest. How should we take this? What did you see in that exchange?
This is the worst of the worst, Richard. And let's be clear, I do a lot of Fox News. As a matter of fact, they called me to do the segment that the gentleman did this morning. So that very easily could have been me. There's no excuse. Fox News has intentionally fostered and festered and allowed to cultivate a culture of pure racism. And we're beyond the place of calling it dog whistles or calling it rhetoric. No, it's racist, and it's intentional. And these are the people who have the ears of the president. Cotton picking. You know what? I'm from Alabama, and my people pick cotton. So I would have the opportunity to sit here in a suit and talk stuff about politics. And forgive me because I'm not comporting myself exactly as professionally as I would like to right now. That is so far beyond the pale of anything that we should find acceptable in the American discourse today that there's no excuse. There's no excuse for Fox News. There's no excuse for these milquetoast Republicans along the rank and file of elected office who lead people in this country not completely repudiating that type of nonsense. Yes, my people pick cotton. I'm very proud of it because me and my sons don't have to, and we have opportunities because those people pick cotton. Shame on David Bossie. Shame on President Trump for supporting this type of stuff. I'm sorry, Richard. I wish I were being a lot more articulate right now. I've got nothing, man. It's unbelievable.
Don, I really appreciate your honesty and reflection on that. There's been a lot of reactions like that, as you've probably seen. Lauren, how would you perceive what was said there in that exchange, again, with the former deputy campaign manager of President Trump?
I mean, to me, it's shocking. It's shocking that it's 2018 and people are still using rhetoric like that. Don, I appreciate your candid and heartfelt reaction because we cannot have a situation in our country where people who are close to the president are using rhetoric like that. I mean, it's just unacceptable to me. Now, I will say I looked on Twitter and I saw that David Bossie issued an apology. he had to. I mean, I think anyone who works in communications would tell him to apologize. But what's done is done, and rhetoric like that just has no place in our country. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. And, you know, my heart just breaks to see anyone who calls himself a Republican using words like that.
Don, there's also that you heard the Representative Gutierrez say, you know, the lack of care in language, so he says, is just not good, but it's good for his base. Your reflection?
Yeah, it's intentional, you know, and it's we've gotten beyond the point of code words, infestation and invasion and animals. You can talk about people in this way when you don't consider them people. You know, so it's actually a very honest manifestation of the president's actual thoughts and actual feelings when he uses these non-human terms to talk about them. You even see yesterday the things that the other commentators say. So it's not just today with the cotton picking. Yesterday, Rachel Campos said, hey, guess what? I've spoken to African Americans, and they tell me that the projects they grew up in are much worse conditions than these literal concentration camps that we're holding babies in on the border right now. So Fox News is the media wing of the Republican Party, and they have worked squarely with the party, with actual people who are governing in this country, to foster a universe of the rhetoric of racism, and it's wildly unacceptable. And the scary thing about it is that these are the people who have the ear of the most powerful person in the world, and actual policy emanates from these words. Actual outcomes for real people are the result of just flat-out racism, and it's no longer acceptable. It's no longer acceptable, Richard.
I do want to read David Bossie's response in full. He says, during a heated segment on Fox and Friends today, I should have chosen my words more carefully and never used the offensive phrase. That I did. I apologize to Joel Payne, Fox News, and its viewers. I thank you both. Don Calloway, again, for your candor. Lauren Zelt, for as well, your candor. We'll have to leave it there. And a programming note for all of you.
Thanks,
Democratic strategist Joel Payne, who we were just talking about, will be on MSNBC here with David Gura at 3 Eastern. So stick around for that. And at the top of the hour, speaking of which, David Gura with a closer look at what migrants are facing in the pursuit of a new life in America. Stick around.